were coming up with were being tested out in the colonies, in the Americas. And so then cartography becomes important because maps become an accurate description of these new places. And they're not just fantastic drawings anymore before you used to have sea dragons, you know. They're actually maps that someone has measured, has been there and they measured, and they're supposed to be accurate. So this is the rise then of cartography, and not only the rise of cartography, but the rise of the values that we put on cartography, where we start believing that they're scientifically neutral, that it's truth, right? What we want to say as critical cartographers is that no maps are neutral. They may be accurate in their depictions of things in relation to each other, but they're always laden with some sort of value, some sort of politics, some sort of power. They're made for a reason. And the maps of the colonies were made so that the colonizers could go there, navigate there, and know the place and control the place. And the same thing happens in Palestine. We see maps for the first time start being included in Bibles in 1525, the first time. And this happens right after the Reformation, which is another important event. You have the scientific revolution, which starts to question authority, but then the Reformation, which starts to question the authority of the Pope. With the Reformation, you have this movement against Catholicism in Europe. And what it is, it's saying, we don't have to believe the priesthood for what the Bible says. We can read it ourselves. We can decide, we can interpret it. People, everybody can read it. And so you get this idea then that from some very, not everybody, some very conservative circles start to interpret the Bible as a factual historical document for the first time. Largely, for a long time, the Bible has been understood as a work of literature, stories that can help you tell moral stories about your life today, and you can modify them accordingly. They weren't understood as stories that actually happened, like the parting of the Red Sea. That was understood as a story, not as an actual event that happened in history. But with the Reformation, when now you can have so many people interpret it the Bible however they want, some people start interpreting it literally. And the Exodus illustration becomes an important map. It actually becomes the first map in a Bible. What's interesting about it, it becomes important because the reformers, the people against the Catholic Church, thought that they were the Israelites and the Pharaoh was the Pope. And so the Exodus story, they're trying to liberate themselves, became very important. Here is a map of the Exodus story from the 16th century. This is not a biblical map, but it's based on a biblical map. If we zoom in, this is Palestine. This is what will be cut up later as Palestine. The yellow is the Promised Land. But if we zoom in, and here's the Sinai Peninsula, we see here that it has the wanderings of the Israelites in the desert before then finally crossing into the Promised Land. What's fascinating about this map is that it was produced in an era where maps of the world were being produced as accurate, contemporary, factual. This is a biblical map of thousands of years ago. It was a map that was included in the very first atlas produced by Abraham Ortelius. Abraham Ortelius had the idea to put together a lot of the world's maps into one book because merchants needed to carry them whenever they sailed, and also diplomats and traders. And he puts together this atlas. It's called Theater of the World, and he sells it to people saying, this is a contemporary atlas. If you buy this atlas, you will know how to get from place to place today. And it has all of the ports that you can sail to and all of the places you should avoid. What was interesting about it, the Palestine map was thousands of years old. It wasn't a map. of the contemporary moment. But it's important in that sense in that for Europeans, this is what Palestine was like. They didn't want to know of Palestine as Muslim or, you know, as Ottoman. They wanted to know it as biblical. So this is how, as biblical from the Bible, yeah? So this is how they depicted it. So having now talked about the relationship between mapping and empire, and we can talk more about that if you like. I think it's very fascinating. We can move on to the specific moment where Palestine becomes mapped. And it's a moment when empire, whether it's a British Empire or the French Empire, comes together with science, mapping, and religion. And this is how we get the map of Palestine, and I'll show you here what I have found. So, moving forward to the 1800s, the Ottoman Empire is falling, and there's a big question. Once the Ottoman Empire falls, the European powers want to know, what's going to happen to all of that territory? Who's going to get it? Yeah? Because whoever gets it, whichever one of the European powers gets it, is probably going to be really strong after they get it. And there was quite a bit of a common understanding that it was probably going to be Russia that got it. And that was because Russia kept making antagonistic moves against the Ottoman Empire at around the late 1700s, early 1800s, and throughout all of the 1800s. And the reason was because, okay, so Russia's up here. Russia needed, in order to sail yearly, it needed a warm water port. All of its ports up north had ice a lot of the year. They needed something that was always warm water so that their ships could sail. And so they wanted to take this area, which connected the area of the Black Sea to the Mediterranean Sea. But the Ottoman Empire controlled it. And they were afraid that they would always have to be at the behest of the Ottoman Empire whether the ports were going to be open or not. And Russia didn't want that. They wanted control. So Europeans thought that it was probably going to be Russia that got this territory. And that worried Britain especially, because Britain was the strongest of all of the European powers at the time. And it didn't want to change that. So, at the same time, Britain and France are at war. The year is 1798, and Napoleon has come to power, and he wants to beat out Britain. It's the only power standing in his way. But Britain has a really powerful navy, and so he does not want to take Britain's navy. So instead, Napoleon points his warships to Egypt. He fights the Egyptians instead of the British. And the reason for it is here. The British at the time, the colonial crown is India. And they're still sailing underneath Africa to get to India. But on emergencies, they take the Suez overland route to get there. It's shorter. But it's not a canal yet. It's overland. So they don't do it a lot. It's just emergencies. Napoleon decides he's going to go there and he's going to cut the canal, and France is going to control it, and that's going to disturb the monopoly that Britain has in India, and then Britain will fall, or at least be less powerful. So Napoleon goes, and he takes with him scientists, artists, poets, but largely scientists, and they're going to map the area. They're going to try to figure out the archaeology of the area, and they do. They are eventually defeated at Akka. They try to go up here, and the British get together with the Ottoman Empire and beat the French, and Napoleon has to go home. So they're defeated in Palestine. So Napoleon's defeated in Palestine. It's like an interesting tidbit. But he goes back, but his scientists, going back to Paris, they put together this encyclopedia of everything they found while they were here. They were here for maybe about 1.5 to 3 years. Napoleon kind of abandoned them, and later they made their way back to France. So they go back to France and they come up with this encyclopedia. It's called The Description of Egypt. It's a very famous encyclopedia. It's really big. It has many volumes. And they publish it and they sell it to Europeans and to Americans. And Americans and Europeans are fascinated because they see stuff like this for the first time. Since the Crusades, has a Western power actually been into the Holy Land? So it's a sign that the Ottoman Empire is falling, but what it also does, it inspires a lot of Westerners to come here. Because if Napoleon can come here and he can do all this, we want to see it too for ourselves, okay? So they have really incredible sketches like this, but what Napoleon's scientists also do is they map. Now this is a map, and here are some grid lines. It's several sheets, about 47 sheets, I believe. 6 of those sheets, here's the Sinai Peninsula, here's the Nile, very detailed, and up here's Palestine. And it's the first time Palestine is mapped in a modern way, meaning actually measured with instruments. Yeah? And here's Gaza. The Gaza sheet shows the coastal area very detailed. You have the coasts that are important to his maps, but you also have the terrain, the hills. And this is because Napoleon is fighting naval warfare, but also ground warfare. So he needs these maps, this kind of map. Again, you make maps when your society calls for them. Yeah? It tells you a lot about the kind of society you're living in. So that's Gaza. This is Jerusalem and Jaffa. And again, the coasts are very detailed. It's actually pretty accurate. They were published in the early 1800s. But they also go inland, and it's not very accurate here. Yeah, it's in Arabic. It says Palestine or the Holy Land. I don't know if I can. I think I can zoom in. So does that mean Palestine or the Holy Land?
Yes. Or Jerusalem.
Or Jerusalem. Land of Jerusalem? So yeah, they actually did include Arabic, but they didn't actually survey Jerusalem, but they wanted to include it anyway because it's a very important biblical site, and the people that were going to buy the encyclopedia were going to want the Holy Land. You can kind of still see the mountains. They look very primitive, yeah? Like caterpillars. They weren't surveyed very well.
It's too accurate.
It's accurate on the coast, yeah, and it's not bad over here. But this actually becomes a really accurate map for the time, like 1800s, early 1800s. Not only that, you also have now something that Hilton Obenzinger calls Holy Land Mania. The West goes crazy. They see these maps of the Holy Land, they see these sketches in the encyclopedia, and they're like, wow, we have to go. And it does increase the amount of Westerners that start coming as biblical researchers or pilgrims and all of that.